May the words of my mouth and the meditations of my heart be acceptable in your sight, O Lord, my God.
Amen.
Please be seated. In an election year like this, we are made keenly aware of the shortcomings and failings of our leaders. And one of the things of which we become even more aware than normal, I think, is the abuse of power that we see amongst those whom we elect. We see senators seducing young pages. We see members of the House cavorting around with mistresses, and all because they can do it. They can get away with it. They have the power. And today we heard one of, I think, the most powerful stories about that, about this abuse of power. David, king of Israel and Judah, the combined kingdom, had been anointed king by God after Saul had just gone completely mad. David got all of Saul's possessions, which were many, all of his wives and concubines, and was the supreme power, political, and probably close to supreme religious power in the entire nation. He had more than he needed, probably had more wives than he knew what to do with. I have trouble with one. And yet, one day he sees this woman bathing. And he's quite taken by her. And he goes and he sends somebody to find out who she is, and they say, she's the wife of Uriah. Uriah the Hittite, one of your generals. And David says, oh, isn't that convenient? Uriah's off at war. So he goes and he seduces Uriah's wife, and she becomes pregnant. And David, when he finds this out, goes, whoops, what am I going to do now? So he decides to call Uriah back from the field and say, you have been out in the field for all of this time, sleeping on the ground. Come home, spend some time with your wife. Uriah comes back, and being the loyal soldier that he is, refuses. He said, I cannot sleep in my own bed while my soldiers are sleeping on the ground. And he sleeps at David's doorstep. And David keeps encouraging him to go be with his wife. And he doesn't do it. So now David's got a real problem. So he sends Uriah back out in the field and calls one of his other generals in and says, okay, here's what I want you to do. I want you to lead, to let Uriah lead a charge against the besieged city, the city they were besieging. And when you get close to the walls, everybody else fall back. So Uriah's left there by himself. And of course he gets killed, which is David's plan. This is one of the most egregious abuses of power that I could think of. One that you would think would be completely unforgivable. But David thinks he's gotten away with this. So God sends the prophet Nathan to him. And he tells this parable of this poor man with one ewe lamb and his rich neighbor who had flocks and herds, but didn't want to feed his guest one of his own animals, so he took the one ewe lamb that his poor neighbor possessed and gave it to and prepared it for his guests. When course, as we heard, David's very angry about this and thinks that the man should be punished and even killed. And Nathan looks him in the eye and said, you are that man. And that's the point at which David realizes what he has done. And he falls on his knees and begs forgiveness. Now, this is a sin that I would find really, really hard to forgive. I mean, it was beyond anything. And it's even made even worse by the fact that David is forgiven and said he is going to be allowed to live, but you're forgiven. But there are consequences. So David's young infant son dies. Now, of course, it wasn't just David's sin. It was Bathsheba's. So the effects are starting to ripple out. When we transgress, we are not the only ones who are harmed. Everyone around us is affected in some way or another when we do something that we know to be wrong. And we have to adopt for a minute, not our 21st century eyes, but the eyes of a time thousands of years before Christ. At which time for a man to lose a son was a terrible, terrible thing. Because of the cultural context. Sons were heirs. Sons were what you lived for. So David didn't get off scot-free, nor did Bathsheba. But the wonderful thing is, although I, or any of us here, I think would have a very difficult time forgiving David for what he did, God did not have a problem. He said, David, you have recognized your transgression. You have repented. You are forgiven. Regardless of the consequences, you have been forgiven. And I think that is the real thing that we take away from this. It's not so much the transgression, terrible as it is, but the fact that no matter how badly we have sinned, although we may suffer consequences, and people around us may suffer consequences, we are forgiven. That sin no longer exists in the eyes of God. So what do we take away from this sordid story? Who are we in this story? David? Bathsheba? Uriah? I think we all fill all of those roles at some time or another in our lives. The one who sins, the one who is sinned against, and the innocent bystander who gets hurt in the process. Or are we Bathsheba, the victim? The one who is abused. And sometimes in our lives, always we're in that position. But the most important character in this story, I think, in this context, is the prophet Nathan. And I think whether or not we are Nathan, that's what we are called to be. We we are called to be that prophet that sees these abuses of power, sees the transgressions of our leaders, and call them to account. Say, no, we will not accept this. That's a hard role to fill. The role of a prophet is always hard to fill. It's not without danger. But that's who Christ calls us to be. God's messengers to this world. God's prophets. To see transgression, to call it to account,